I have traveled alone in more than 40 countries on 3 continents, more than a dozen of them just in the last 2 years alone. That's my claim to authority on the topic of traveling alone and exploring the world. Traveling alone sounds scary to many people, but it really shouldn't be. A few tricks and a few safety tips plus a good dose of common sense can make almost all solo traveling remarkably safe, affordable and fulfilling. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so I've been getting several requests, one of them quite emphatic over the months, about making a video concerning the issue of solo traveling. Now, at first I thought I'd only include the finesse aspects resulting from my long experience, but then I remembered the slew of ignorant tourists that I kept stumbling upon all over the place, so maybe I should include the basics too, even though that will make the video a lot longer. Given that solo travelers, officially called backpackers, is on the rise on most of the planet, I'll try to make this video as inclusive as it can be. So basically the video is not for experienced travelers, but for the average Joe and Jane. So without further ado, here are 20 tips and tricks to use while traveling alone. Trigger warning, some of them are inherently racist and sexist by modern day standards of discourse, but it is not my role to make you feel good, it is my role to teach you how to be safe and have an overall pleasant experience. So, number 1, always have cash in small bills. Now, this sounds like an obvious thing. Of course you need money if you travel, but I'm speaking literally here. Have physical cash in small bills and coins, always, without exception. If you can't purchase the currency before you leave your home base, then make this your top priority upon arrival. Ideally, you should have 80% of your budget in cash and 20% or less on a debit card. No matter what you may believe about cash payments, the reality is that card payments are quite rare on most of the planet, and even if you travel in a place where that is common, you're still very, and I insist, very likely to end up in situations where your card is not recognized in the country of destination. For instance, most European cards, debit or credit, are not recognized in the United States. I've met 3 separate tourists in my last US trip, a Swedish man, a French woman and a Portuguese dude, who were crying with money on their accounts but unable to spend them. Now, fortunately for them, they met me and I knew some workarounds which helped. But don't rely on that. Experienced travelers aren't everywhere around the block and you might end up in a very complicated situation. Cash is still king all over the planet and the preferred payment mean in the service industry, which you'll be needing quite a lot when you're traveling. And again, if you can purchase the currency before arriving there, that's even better. For instance, in Lithuania, there is only one bank, the medical bank, that does currency exchange at a terrible rate and only sometimes. Better have the euros in cash with you. In Denmark, you get charged an enormous amount in fees if you pay by card, that is, if you're lucky enough and your card is recognized. So better have some euros or dollars with you in cash and buy local kroner at the currency exchange office. You'll pay a fee there too, but it's a lot smaller, believe me. Number 2, do your own research. Again, this sounds basic, but it's astonishingly rare. I met quite a few tourists that claimed they wanted to explore a place but had not even the basic ideas about the country they were in. Prime examples would be the German tourists I met in the Republic of Georgia who did not know that Abkhazia and South Ossetia are restricted areas, best to be avoided if you're not fluent in Russian or Georgian. They were intending to go hiking dangerously close to a very hot border area. If they hadn't met me, You might have heard of a German couple being detained in a nebulously recognized area de facto occupied by Russia, but for which nobody takes responsibility. And that is a messed up situation to be in. Another example would be an Austrian tourist I met in Albania, who knew Albania was a former communist country, but had no idea about Enver Hoxha or just how bad things were, yet at the same time claimed knowledge about the country and claimed is there to explore. Right. I could go on and mention the American tourist I met in Tbilisi, who had been walking for more than 10 kilometers in the wrong direction, yet was reluctant to listen to me when I told her she was indeed walking in the wrong direction and should take the metro in the correct direction. Now, I'm not saying trust me or random strangers, but bloody do your research. So, what should you research first? Well, for starters, what are the languages spoken in the place of destination? With few exceptions, all countries in the world have a de facto second language. Most have at least 2 foreign languages that are common. American tourists are usually the worst on this. I could write an entire book just with what I have personally observed with American tourists who not only fail to do their research, but then are also pissed off when they realize that no, not everyone speaks English, and contrary to what you may believe, nobody outside the English-speaking world is under any obligation to learn your language. You are in their country, so you adapt. It's that easy. Another thing to research before you even board the plane or train or car or whatever are basic laws and the de facto situation. And I insist on the latter, because most countries can have a de facto situation that differs quite radically from what's on the books. For example, in Turkey, the police hates on foreigners quite a lot. As a result, you should take extra precautions to never need the police while you are in the Turkish Republic. In Albania, smoking weed is punishable by 20 years in jail. In theory. In reality, there's weed-themed nightclubs, and in some bars it's sold quite openly and nobody cares. Also, if you're a foreigner, you're even more likely to be ignored if you smoke a joint in Albania. Not in Turkey though. You'll be royally screwed for that in Turkey. Don't do it. Another example is crossing the street. In Serbia or Albania or Macedonia or Armenia, you can cross the street almost whenever you feel like. The drivers will slow down and everything is honky-dory. In fact, in Serbia, the police slowed down to allow me to cross an intersection on a diagonal. And in Albania, the police whistled at me to start crossing the street already while I was waiting at the red light. Meanwhile, in Bosnia, should you cross even the smallest street on a red light, you're almost always going to get ticketed. But this applies to more serious issues as well. For instance, overstaying your visa in the Republic of Georgia is usually not a big deal. Usually, unless you're Muslim. Overstaying your visa in neighboring Armenia or Azerbaijan, no matter who you are, you're in really deep manure, my friend. Always research the topics where you're more likely to skirt the law. For instance, I know the smoking laws in every country because I rarely abide by them, so I make sure I'm informed what can happen and what can I do in case I'm caught breaking them. From experience, I can tell you that I have yet to find a country where anyone gives a real shit about smoking laws. On this point, I should also mention pictures and video. Laws and practices differ quite radically from country to country on this issue. For instance, in Saudi Arabia, videotaping or taking pictures of most of the buildings is forbidden. While technically videotaping on the streets is not forbidden, in practice it kinda is. That's why you won't be seeing an exploring Riyadh video on this channel anytime soon. Also, the policy concerning videotaping inside various buildings can differ quite radically on the same street. So make sure you always ask first, or if you don't, stop filming the second a figure of authority tells you to. Stop filming first, ask questions second. Again, unless you know what you're doing, which implies being willing and able to argue efficiently, and it took me years to learn that, so if you're a novice traveler, don't try this at home, so to speak. Anyway, number 3. Learn the public transport system, and fast. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to those who travel by car, but then again, those hardly qualify as backpackers anymore. With few exceptions, such as the United States, most countries have a remarkably reliable public transport system. Now, reliable and good are not the same thing. So that's what you should study beforehand, so you'll know what to expect. Also on this topic, make sure you're familiar at least somewhat with the geography of the country or countries you are visiting. For instance, I never leave home without knowing beforehand at least where the main roads and main railways go through. This is highly useful in case you get lost or if you notice you took the wrong bus or the wrong train. It's not a big deal if you figure it out after 10 or 15 kilometers in the wrong direction, but it can be quite a huge deal if you figure it out 200 kilometers in the wrong direction. Of this, I guess I could give the example of an acquaintance of mine who took the wrong train from Amsterdam Central and woke up in Belgium. And he didn't speak French. Let's just say that he was lucky to know me, otherwise he would have had to hitchhike all the way back to Romania, which he might have failed to do as well since he was in an area where not many foreigners go through, so without French language skills, that can be quite a challenge. But seriously, know the geography and the public transport system. That can prevent a ton of problems from ever emerging. Also, as a general rule, don't plan trips inside the country with train connections smaller than 45 minutes unless you know that country very well, speak its language, and know the railway station where you have the connection also very well. Contrary to various myths that go around about various countries, there is no such thing as a country where trains don't have delays. Sure, most of the time we're talking of delays of no more than 25 minutes, but don't count on the train arriving on time. 45 minutes should be the bare minimum for a connection. Again, unless you really know what you're doing. Same goes for buses. Unless you know the road or the highway being used, avoid scheduling tight connections. It's just better that way. Also, many bus terminals and railway stations can be bloody confusing, and I would give here as an example the central railway station in Stockholm, the T-Centralen, and the international bus terminal in Krakow, Poland, or the bus terminal Naplighet in Budapest, or the railway station in Köln, Germany, or the main railway station in Kiev, Ukraine. Very confusing or big places. The chances of finding your connection in under 5 minutes are quite slim, so don't take that chance. Alright, number 4, don't bank on technology. Believe it or not, the internet can be a hindrance more often than not. Unless you're in a city with a huge tourist infrastructure made to cater to people who can't find their dick without their smartphone, and most cities are not like that, then forget about technology. Not to mention that outside a few tiny places in the world, you will increase your phone bill exponentially if you rely on navigation to take you to places. The best solution remains the conservative or the classic one. Ask people around, buy a map, although most cities now have tourist maps free of charge as well, and then bloody walk. In my experience, the only place where technology is highly useful is when finding and booking cheap places to stay. That's an area where technology has indeed improved things quite a lot. There are services out there with properties in almost every country and city on Earth. That is very useful. But other than that, take what you see on the internet with a huge grain of salt. If it doesn't have video or pictures with a clear date on them, be skeptical. A map bought today in the city you are in is always superior to an old map from Google Maps, something which some of my friends have learned the hard way because they failed to listen to me. Anyway, number 5, trust but verify whenever you can. So for instance, if your government tells you to avoid a certain area of a certain country or a certain area of a certain city or indeed an entire country, verify that with the locals. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's bollocks. For example, my government tells me I should avoid going to Ukraine because there's terrorism over there. A fine warning, but it would be fitting for France, really. Another example are the restrictions on cash. For instance, the entirety of the information provided by my government concerning traveling to Israel is either false, misleading, or outdated. But this is true for private providers as well. For instance, the airline I used to get to the United States asked a crap ton of information claiming that it is required by the US federal government. Now, I knew that was bullcrap, but most people didn't, and they ended up giving to a third party sensitive information about themselves for literally no reason. And I could go on like this for an hour at the very least, but basically you should try to verify what you're being told about certain places. Again, sometimes what you're being told is true, but oftentimes it's either entirely false or seriously exaggerated. Also, do keep in mind that most governments tend to exaggerate. The US Foreign Office is also notorious for exaggerating the potential dangers, like they did recently when they advised Americans to keep a low profile while in London. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe London is a shithole, and it's one of the ugliest places I've been so far in my life, and I have visited more than 1,000 cities just this decade alone. But is it such a dangerous place where Americans are being hunted down and beaten up? No, not really. You might be in trouble though if you're too white or too non-Muslim in certain areas though, American or not. Which brings me to number 6, demographic questions. Now, it's not politically correct to speak about this, but many countries have areas where certain demographic groups are simply not safe. The only group of tourists that I have met and consistently researches this beforehand are the Japanese. Japanese tourists always study whether a country or a certain place in that country is racist towards Asians, and if that's the case, they avoid it. It's simple. I would suggest though that you'd research this when you're already in the country of destination rather than online, because again, oftentimes the intel you gather on the ground is superior to what you may find online. For instance, officially there are several dozens of areas in Denmark where white people aren't particularly secure. In reality, only Mjølneparken is truly unsafe and best to be avoided unless you really know what you're doing or you're a big Eastern European guy. And I'm quite serious about this. Diversity and progress seems to have quite an ingrained fear of us Eastern Europeans. It might be something to do with the fact that we're nowhere near as polite with barbarians. Now, other than ethnic and racial concerns, there are also different concerns by sex, especially outside of Europe, but also in certain areas of Europe, both west and east. If you're a woman, don't go during the night in areas where the demographics skew Gypsy, African, or the religion of peace. Seriously, just don't. It's better. If you're a man and go into an area that skews religion of peace or Gypsy, make sure you don't piss off anyone, especially their women. You don't want to find out the hard way how brutal Gypsy or Muslim women can be when they are on what they perceive to be their turf. If you're a woman and you go into a Muslim majority country that is not Northern Cyprus, Tunisia, Turkey, or Albania, well, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should take your boyfriend with you, or your brother. I know, it's not halal to talk about it, but it's true. Those 4 that I mentioned are perfectly fine. The rest, not so much. Now, of course, that doesn't mean they're all equally bad. Even in relatively secularized or at least peaceful and stable countries such as Morocco or Jordan, you can expect, as a woman, a reasonable amount of harassment from both men and women if you're there alone. Some Muslim places have quite a few restrictions for men too. For instance, Saudi Arabia has a separate modesty dress code for men, and so do several areas of Malaysia and Indonesia. Sadly, this topic has been abandoned altogether or minimized on most travel guides because of left-wing politics, essentially. I remember what huge brouhaha came out when a Chinese travel agency was informing their clients about the real dangers in London. So basically, you're kinda in the desert when it comes to demographics-related concerns. Now, while we're at it, if you're a Christian, you might want to avoid wearing a cross in public if you're anywhere in Africa, the Middle East, or China. for different reasons. In China, for instance, open displays of religion are quite haram, and while not everyone will be questioned or harassed by the communist authorities, it's better not to give them a reason to. In Africa, some countries are quite overtly Christians, but there is such thing as Boko Haram and many other groups also active in the cities, and you might want to avoid being picked on, especially if you're white. Alright, number 7, know your limits. This again sounds very banal, but you'd be amazed how many times tourists and travelers have gotten themselves into trouble because of their own failing to know their limits. And when I say know your limits, I mean any limit. For instance, if you don't know how you'd react to a certain item of food, then don't ingest that particular item while you're in a place that's too far from a hospital or other forms of help. This is particularly true for those who come from highly, and I dare say unhealthily, sanitized environments, since such individuals tend to suffer from the highest amounts of allergies per capita. Also, on the topic of food, just exercise some caution. Not everything that tastes good and appears to have no immediate effect may indeed be good for you. So what I would recommend is that if you find an item of food you want to try a small amount, wait 24 hours. If you liked it and there are no visible effects, then try a bit more the next day, still less than you would want to. If all is still good, then you can enjoy it. Basically, be conservative and circumspect with food you don't know much about. Mind you, most of the time the effects are either a bit of diarrhea or perhaps some harsher stool, but still, exercise caution and make sure you can easily get help. Again, I know this from experience. I enjoyed the Armenian hachapuri a bit too much, but I spoke Russian and lived next to a drugstore, so it was overall no big deal. But if you're unsure about something, it's better to be safe than sorry. Same goes for other things, such as alcohol. This happens in Eastern Europe quite a lot, with tourists from everywhere, really. But tourists from the Muslim world get into alcohol-induced coma quite frequently, because for far too many of them, it's the first time in their lifetime when they go to a place where alcohol is plentiful and cheap. Tourists from South America get drunk and oftentimes harass the locals, largely for the same reason. They don't know their limits. But this doesn't apply just with things you put in your mouth, it applies to other things too. A friend of mine from the mountain rescue unit could write a book about the foreigners he had to risk his life for solely because those foreigners did not know their limits and or had not done their research. If you know you have respiratory problems, don't climb a 2400 meters tall mountain without proper equipment. Seriously, if you know you have balance issues or height sickness, don't sign up for a zipline adventure. I mean, just saying. Alright, which one is this? 8. Don't videotape or take pictures of military facilities and border areas unless you've been given explicit permission to do so. I mean, seriously, just don't. There is not a single country on earth that allows this. Now, of course, consequences vary from being told to stop filming to outright 10 years of hard labor and anything in between. But if you don't know what you're doing or you're unsure, assume it's not allowed and don't do it. Now surely someone will come and say, but Lucian, you videotaped inside Hoja's bunker, which is a military facility, or on the Ukrainian border and on the Cyprus UN demarcation line, blah blah blah. Yeah, I did that. But I know what I'm doing. And that's why there aren't that many vloggers like me, because most people are not me. And for the record, for most of that footage I had explicit permission, and where I had no such permission, like in Cyprus, I had the funds to pay the fine if I had been issued one. In other words, I knew what I was doing and had researched the issue quite thoroughly beforehand. I also knew my limits, namely that I was willing to play dumb or indeed argue with a Cypriot police officer, but not so much with an armed UN security officer. Anyway, the point is that unless you're an experienced traveler, you should avoid playing around with this rule. It almost never ends well. Number 9. Not all countries are equal. This is especially for those people who tend to wrongly assume that just because they did something in 2 or 3 countries, then that suddenly means they can do that in the next 3 countries. There are many differences inside the same country, but to assume that a neighboring country would be similar is quite foolish. Sure, sometimes the neighboring country is similar, but oftentimes it isn't, and it can differ quite radically. One example would be Armenia and Iran. Yeah, sure, they're neighbors, and it's very easy to cross from one to the other, but they might as well be on different planets altogether. Almost nothing in Armenia is similar to what you'll get in Iran. Number 10. Emergency exit strategy. Always keep an amount of money in cash that is enough to take you from the country you're into back to your home country or to a third safe country. This is not negotiable. More often than not, you will not need this, but it's better to come back home with some cash than the alternative. Now, in 10 years, I only needed an exit strategy once, and that was a day in which I praised myself quite a lot for my habit of always having a clear exit strategy. In addition to the money, always have a clear strategy or plan on how to get from wherever you are in the country you're visiting back to safety. This means, as said earlier, being familiar with the geography and the transportation system of the country you're in. Also, keep in mind that this is not about buying a round-trip ticket. Just because you have a plane ticket to get back home, that doesn't mean you have an exit strategy. It just means you planned to come back on a particular date. But what if you need to leave the area sooner than planned? In other words, as we say here, what if the calculation at the farmer's market doesn't fit the calculation you made back home? Depending on the issue that triggers the need for an exit strategy, the exit can also be into a third country. For instance, if you're from Spain and you find yourself in the middle of a government clampdown on dissidents in Azerbaijan, it would be foolish to try to get to an airport to get back to Spain. In fact, airports would be the first to be crawling with police and secret services profiling everyone. In such a scenario, the fastest way is to get a minivan ride, or a marshrutka, as it's called over there, to Republic of Georgia. Preferably a night ride where the customs officers will be tired and not in the mood to even ask too many questions. Once you're in Georgia, then you can assess the situation safely. It might be the case that you can go back 2 days later, or it might be the case that you'll have to look for options to get back to Spain, but from Georgia. Again, this is a theoretical example. Basically what I'm saying is, with this 10th point, is that you should have a backup country nearby in case something goes wrong. And many things can go wrong without it being your fault, mind you. This is another mistake many backpackers commit. They think that just because they don't do something wrong or nefarious or dubious, then they don't have to take these things into consideration. Utterly stupid. There are so many things that can go wrong and can affect you negatively that it would take a separate video just on that alone to explain. Coup d'etats, massive protests, an accident that inflames the public opinion, wrongly or rightly, it doesn't matter, a separatist movement, a military invasion, you can ask the tourists enjoying Sevastopol about that, by the way, back in 14, or a football match going wrong and triggering an unusual response from the authorities. There are so many things. Again, the world doesn't revolve around you personally, and many things can happen independent of your will. The onus is on you to be prepared. Number 11. Health and life insurance. Now, Europeans in particular tend to believe that their health insurance is somehow magically recognized everywhere. Nope, not the case outside the European Union. Conversely, health and life insurance isn't necessary everywhere, but you will learn that with experience. So if you're not an experienced traveler, do spend a few shekels on health and life insurance, usually sold as travel insurance, at least by European agencies. It's not expensive, but it saves you a lot of trouble. You should particularly purchase such a policy if you're going to travel a lot by car or bus, by far the least safe means of transportation. Number 12. Clothes and luggage in general. An unofficial motto, or indeed a rule among experienced travelers, sounds something like this: pack double the money you think you'll need and half of the stuff you think you need. Basically, with few exceptions, such as Scandinavia, all countries have places where you can get really, really bloody cheap clothes. So don't pack too many clothes. You can buy at the destination in case you really need more, but oftentimes you really don't. This is a skill that is acquired. It's not something that you can learn in a classroom, and in my experience, men acquire this skill much faster than women. Ideally, your luggage should not be heavier than 20 kilograms or 40 pounds when you leave home. If it's heavier than that, you probably packed too much stuff. I traveled through Albania, Hungary and Slovenia with a luggage that weighed 16 kilograms, which also included the entirety of the video taping equipment that I'm using right now to tape this video. Without the equipment, it would have been even lighter. Before I had this channel, my luggage never exceeded 12 kilograms and was often as light as 12 pounds. This policy has two reasons. One is the obvious mobility. It's easier to go from one train to another and from one bus to another with a smaller and lighter bag than with a slew of heavy bags. It's also cheaper on airfares if you travel by plane. But there's another reason, namely that you can have room to bring stuff from your travels when you're coming back home. I don't know about you, but I usually bring souvenirs, and if I don't find anything particularly amazing to buy, at least I bring cigarettes, so I still use the extra space in the luggage. But no, seriously, your luggage should be as light as possible. If you're unsure whether you need a certain item, then you assume you don't need it. Next, medicine. Now, this is not a problem for me because I don't have any special needs in this regard, so I don't have to carry drugs with me, but there are many people who do. So, do your research. Many countries have severe restrictions on what kind of and what amount of medicine you can bring with you. You might want to check out those and also have with you the international name of the drug you need for treatment, because you might find it in the country of destination under a different name and almost always at a different price. Ideally though, you should have the amounts you need with you and papers to prove it, because sadly too many countries have retarded systems and make the purchasing of life-saving drugs an absolute nightmare or even impossible for non-residents. Next, number 14, hitchhiking. Don't do it. Seriously, just don't. Don't. And again, unless you know the country and the area really well and you speak the language, yeah. But mind you, I have hitchhiked quite a lot and likely will do it again, but not in areas I don't know well. For instance, I would totally hitchhike in Serbia, but never in Jordan. I would totally hitchhike in Ukraine, in fact I did it several times already, but never in Russia. Hitchhiking is a highly risky activity and should only be engaged in as a last resort. And by that I mean you're stuck in a place and the next train is 3 days from now, or the railways are blocked by snow, or even extreme events like this, but those are very rare. If you're unsure whether you have to hitchhike or not, then you probably don't have to hitchhike. If you don't speak the local language or a common second language of the area, do not hitchhike. Seriously, I cannot emphasize this enough. A significant number of cases of backpackers killed or harmed or robbed in various places involve the backpacker being naive enough to hitchhike. Number 15. Fiscal discipline. Now, of course, this varies quite a lot on your budget, but I still do recommend quite a strict discipline on your finances while traveling, even if you have an oversized budget. And the reason is quite simple. You can get a lot more for your shekel than you hoped for if you are a bit disciplined. My latest example is the Albania trip, where I had a decent budget compared to the local prices. Now, I could have stayed in a more top-tier hotel and used taxis, but because of fiscal discipline, I could visit 4 cities instead of 2 planned, I could cover more things than previously planned, and also enjoy some more stuff. Tourists usually spend an enormous amount of money by drinking and or eating in establishments that are in the city centers. That's both financially irresponsible and bad traveling practice. Because, and this is true for many reasons. First of all, the tourist-oriented restaurants and these establishments in general rarely give you a flavor of the local culture. So take the extra step to take the bus or the tram or the metro, whichever may be the case, and go eat in a regular restaurant where the locals go. Not only you'll get everything cheaper, but oftentimes better, and on top of that, you get to mingle more with the locals and observe more of how the country you're visiting is functioning. Most of my observations about various places that ended up being spot on were formed because I practice this and I avoid tourist-oriented establishments like plague. In Georgia, for instance, except for the day in which I taped the footage from the old town in Tbilisi, I only ate at working-class restaurants. Holy smokes, the food is much better and astonishingly cheaper. And this is true in every single country. I've been so far with the possible exception of the United Kingdom, where the quality of food is atrocious no matter where you go, but the price trick still holds true there as well. Alright, number 16. Currency exchanges. Now, as an absolute rule, currency exchange offices in airport, railway stations, and international bus stations are a bloody rip-off. I have seen a few exceptions, but as an absolute rule, you should avoid them like plague. With that said, you can't always avoid them. For instance, in Albania, I had to exchange 20 euros at the airport because I had none of the local currency, so I had no way of getting into the city. Also, in some countries, currency exchange offices are rare or non-existent. I mentioned Lithuania as one example, add the United Kingdom to that list too. Although nowhere near as bad as Lithuania, if you're not in the entertainment area of London, you'll be having quite a problem in exchanging foreign currency into pound sterling. But Lithuania and the UK use internationally recognized currency, so you should be able to buy their currency before you leave your home base. The situation gets complicated though when you go to places that have few such offices and don't use an internationally recognized currency. One such place is Northern Cyprus, which uses the Turkish lira. Now that's fine, but if you don't buy Turkish lira at the border, good luck. On most of the rest of the territory, you either have to go through a complicated bank process or pay in euros at a brutally unfair rate. Luckily, the currency exchange offices near the border have very fair rates, which is an absolute exception to the rule in my experience. Ideally, you should look up for a currency exchange office in a working class area or alternatively in an area where many immigrants tend to live. The reason is quite simple. Such offices tend to have the best rate. The point is to avoid using banks. This is both for convenience, because an exchange operation usually takes 20 seconds in a currency exchange office, while it rarely takes less than 10 minutes, usually a lot more than that, in a bank. But also for flexibility reasons. As a general rule, a currency exchange office is much better stocked and has fewer rules. Now, that's not an issue if you're in Europe, but it gets quite complicated if you're in North Africa, the Middle East, or beyond. There are many places out there where exchanging 500 euros draws attention in a bank, but not in a currency exchange office. Number 17. Keep at least a copy of your passport always with you. Again, many tourists, especially solo travelers and backpackers, have gotten in trouble because of this. In most of Europe, and especially beyond, you can be required at any moment to present a form of ID for any reason or no reason. Now, you may believe that's bad, and I agree with you. But nevertheless, it is what it is. Many experts and advisors tend to tell their tourists to keep their documents safe in the hotel rather than on their person. I'm not convinced by that. But then again, I don't drink alcohol almost never when I'm abroad. I don't get into physical fights, and generally I know how to take care, so I'm not afraid to keep my passport with me. However, if you're afraid you might lose your passport, you should have a notarized copy with you. Or in the case of Europeans, just keep your national ID card with you and the passport at the hotel. And if anyone asks, tell them your passport was required at the hotel. It's a trick that gets you out of many troubles. In Armenia, the state bank even agreed to exchange money with my national ID card, even though technically that's not allowed. But seriously, you should always have an ID with you. You may never need it, but the one time you'll need it, it will make it worth the hassle. Trust me on that. Alright, let's go further. Number 18, don't stand out if you don't have to. Basically, try to dress as close as possible with the locals and don't stand out in the crowd unless you have to. Oftentimes I have to because a huge tripod is hard to hide, but most people don't have to. This practice also reduces the chances of crime being committed against you. There is no universal panacea, and the risk of being assaulted or mugged exists in a certain dose pretty much everywhere. But not standing out is very good practice, especially when visiting a country with significantly lower purchasing power than your country of origin. Number 19. Always buy a local phone number. Now, not only you will save up on roaming surcharges, but it will also make it easier to connect with people if you happen to know someone in that country, and local services. In many cities, for instance, you can't call a taxi if you don't have a local phone number. Also, most of the time, the local offers are better than even your best plan when it comes to calling back home. Moreover, buying a local phone number gives you several hints about how free or unfree a country is. For instance, in Hungary, I believe I told this story before, back in 2014, I signed more papers for a prepaid SIM card than I had signed when I opened my business as a foreigner in a non-EU country. That was an important hint for me. And finally, number 20, avoid cabs if you can. As an absolute rule, taxis ordered via phone call from the company are the best. This is true essentially everywhere on the planet. The next best thing is to have a recognized international hotel call the cab for you. Everything else, well, it depends on the country. The worst is to take the cab from the airport or the railway station. More often than not, you'll pay at least double the actual fare, and that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that you'll be taken somewhere else entirely than where you wanted to. Sometimes it's because the driver is a dick, but sometimes it's because the driver doesn't actually know the place you ask him to take you, and instead of admitting up front that he's uninformed, he'll try to guess around. Obviously, the experience gets better if you speak the local language. And finally, there's also the negotiation part. Some countries have that embedded into practice, such as Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, Bulgaria, Macedonia, and a few others, where negotiating a fare before getting into the taxi is the absolute norm. In other countries, such thing is absolutely haram, such as my own, or Hungary, or Sweden, or Germany, or Croatia. Basically, what I'm saying is that taxis are such a complicated mess that oftentimes even experienced travelers can get into trouble with them. So unless you absolutely need a taxi, it's better to avoid them altogether. And make no mistake, need is a term I use quite conservatively. You don't need a taxi for 2 or 3 kilometers. You don't need a taxi if the place you want to go to is 2 or 3 kilometers away from public transport and that option is still available. You need a taxi when no option is available, the distance is bigger than 5 kilometers and you have heavy luggage, or if it goes through an otherwise unsafe area. So yeah, just because you're a bit lazy and don't want to walk a bit, it doesn't mean you need a cab. It just means you're lazy. Ultimately, most of these can be summed up as just exercise common sense, but then again, common sense ain't that common. If you are excessively paranoid, then solo traveling is not for you. I mean, solo traveling still does involve a dose of risk, but then again, all traveling is risky. What I'm saying here is that there are ways to mitigate some of those risks and make your trip more enjoyable. With cheaper, faster and freer traveling becoming more and more available, the number of solo travelers and backpackers will continue to rise for the foreseeable future, which on one hand is good news for me, because 10 years ago people would look to me like I had 3 hands and 5 eyes when I told them that I travel alone because I want to see the world and purely for widening perspectives. Today people are much more accustomed to that. It's no longer weird. But given how much lack of common sense I saw in way too many backpackers, this might in the future create a needlessly paranoid narrative about solo traveling. If you remember, 2 years ago I covered on the channel a story of 2 women who got killed somewhere in South America, and I said then that the tragedy could have been avoided if the ladies had exercised some common sense. I got some flack over that at the time for victim blaming, but the fact of the matter is that oftentimes the victim does bear some responsibility. Not always though, and here I would give the example of a homosexual backpacker killed last year in Canada, or the Japanese backpacker killed a few years ago in Romania, both of them victims of serial killers. That is tragic and really bad luck, but that's also exceedingly rare. A lot more common is solo travelers being victims of various crimes, usually mugging, petty theft and fraud, as a result of naivete rather than anything else. And not taking responsibility for your own integrity is your damn fault. That of course doesn't absolve the criminal from responsibility, but you're all smart people and you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'll stop here because the video is already too damn long, although I've missed quite a few more things, but I will now cede the floor to you people. I know there are a few experienced travelers who also watch this channel, so I'd like to hear from you. Also, for everyone else, have you broken any of the policies that I recommend, and if so, what were the results? If not, what made you end up with similar policies? I'm interested in the thought process, but also in examples. For instance, I have not been to Latin America yet, so I'm hoping I'll get some examples from there. And with all that being said, thank you all for watching, thank you for your consistent and generous support. Please do consider throwing a few dollars my way if you derive any value from the work being done here. Please do subscribe to my social media, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.